I'd like now, please, to turn to Director Freeh. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. Director Freeh, you were, of course, the director of the FBI for 8 years, but also you have a very distinguished legal career, and therefore you're no stranger to the pursuit of justice and the truth. I'd like, please, for you to elaborate for our audience how the Iranian regime relies on disinformation and its demonization campaign, but also how you see it affecting US policy vis-à-vis the Iranian regime.
Well, thank you very much, Azadeh, and good to be with you all again today here. You know, I can't really make pronouncements on US policy. I'm not sure that anybody can actually discern the trends some days. But I will talk a little bit about the propaganda manipulation by the regime, and I think that's a subject that everyone here not only acknowledges, but has grappled with in different ways. It doesn't make the regime really distinct from many other totalitarian governments, whether they're in China or the Russian Federation or many other countries, where information is manipulated, created, controlled, and any correction or any resort to the truth is brutally suppressed. In our democratic countries, as Candace was saying, we have propaganda too. In our country, we have propaganda coming from political parties, from politicians on a daily basis. People tune into their network station to get what they think is a better perspective of the news. But, you know, we're overwhelmed with a sea of propaganda. The difference is we have First Amendment, free media. We have people with the right to speak out. We have courts of law that correct, whether it's in a defamation case or something else, lies and manipulated information. So that's the critical distinction between the regime and a democratic country. There are many others, of course. They manipulate and control information and exploit it. When we were working with the State Department years ago to remove the NCRI and the MEK from the terrorist list, you know, we ran smack into embedded propaganda that people, I think of goodwill in the State Department, had just automatically incorporated into official government files and findings. So we had a very, very difficult time undoing that. For instance, we made the point that everybody in Ashraf 1 was interviewed by the FBI to see whether they had pro-terrorism links or intentions, and nobody was found to be in that category. So even though the information was transmitted several times to the State Department, it kept getting played back to us in a number of different ways. U.S. policy, you know, has been impacted by that, not just in the delisting, which finally occurred not because the State Department decided to correct its files and its perspective, but a court of appeals was ready to haul the government before it and not only hold it in contempt, but also make findings that the organization should never have been placed on the list. Placed on the list, by the way, without the FBI ever being asked to look at the facts. So, you know, we have to encourage opposition media. We have to encourage free speech, the kind of work that this great organization does to get the truth out, to open up the dialogue with a 10-point program that invites honesty and integrity in communications as opposed to controlling the media. And that has to be done. We're going to be dealing with these issues for a long time, and they're getting more complicated. A judge in the United States just cited 3 lawyers because the lawyers had submitted a brief to the judge using AI for their research. The problem was many of the cases cited in the brief were just made up. They didn't exist. So we all have to be on guard for that. And it's a condition that's going to be corrected only when the regime falls and the forces of democracy and freedom and truth and good journalism are able to to survive. You know, there's all kinds of different manipulations of propaganda. We've seen what the regime does, which is intentional and directed towards their national policy. It can also be the result of a mistake. Sometimes a government or a foreign policy is mistaken in its assessments, and that has to be corrected by adding facts and making sure that the political dialogue is strong. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think the organization here has done enormous good work and made progress in that. But we have to be very, very careful about what our facts are. As a lawyer, somebody who was in a government agency for many years, we have to be very, very careful about the facts. I haven't seen any information, for instance, that our State Department encouraged the raid in Albania. And if there is such information, I'd be very pleased to see it. But we have to be careful about making statements that are incorrect, that just confuse the dialogue in a different way. We regret very much what happened in Albania, but we have to keep in mind that that was the only country, of all the countries represented in this room, that was the only country that was willing to accept MEK refugees who were being murdered on a daily basis in Iraq. And I think we have to keep that in mind and temper our criticism and also our expectations. We should get the facts as to what happened, but in the meantime, we shouldn't pillory what is really the only stated, demonstrated state friend of the MEK. No, thank you very much. Good panel and good discussion. You know, as Link said, a lot of times propaganda is further promulgated because a free democratic media doesn't criticize, doesn't intervene, doesn't take a position. So I think you know, we could do a better job of that in the United States. It's hard to imagine that there are people in the State Department and the West Wing of the White House who still think we can sign some type of credible, enforceable deal with a regime that, as you heard before, is run by gangsters and has no rules except their own. You know, our government, and particularly our leaders, should have been and should be forcefully and personally standing up for the young women, the young men who are being killed and slaughtered in Iran. We don't see that. We don't see them supporting regime change. We see this, you know, diplomatic back and forth. In the meantime, can we have a meeting in Vienna to please get some kind of a nuclear deal from you? You know, this is a regime that is a murderous regime. It's pretty well doomed, by the way, a regime that is not supported by the people. The people see it as financially, politically, and morally bankrupt. It's not going to all of a sudden have a resurgence. It's going to get weaker before it collapses. But meanwhile, we need our leaders, particularly our leaders in America, to keep reminding the media and the taxpayers that this is a regime that murdered hundreds of American servicemen and women in Iraq, wounded thousands more with their bombs and devices. They murdered 19 U.S. airmen at Khobar Towers. They're still attacking through their militia network, you know, our people in Syria. We should be talking about that and not trying to get their signature on a piece of paper that's completely worthless.